Some of y'all may remember this video.
And historically speaking, women's rights and feminism has excluded Black women and women of color because it only sees women's rights through the eyes of white women. Historically, women's rights and feminism has kicked us to the curb when it benefited them to do so.
So between that piece of the video and then our discussion on white suffragettes, that of course leads us to a discussion on Black suffragettes. I'm going to start it with Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth actually being the beginning of the suffragettes, beginning of equal rights. And when I read that, and I only read it in one place, I could not find any place else that said that. And normally I don't rely on one source. But I'm comfortable saying this because when I researched them individually, I remembered they were proponents for not just women's rights, but Black rights as well. Not just equality for one, but equality for all. So I understand how the writer came to that conclusion. I'm biased. I'm gonna say Black women started it too, as we tend to start all movements. With that being said, so there were abolitionists, and we know a few of them. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, these upper class white women, they compared the oppression that they felt in marriage and in the private sector to slavery. Okay, so these women, because they compared themselves to slavery, that's really the main reason why they joined other abolitionists, right? Because the theory, of course, being once you set one free, you obviously have to set the other free. Anyway, so the abolitionists who headed the ERA, Equal Rights Association, happened to be Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And they had a primarily white agenda, and they wanted the right to vote for women, white women. We discussed that, okay? While Black suffragettes wanted the right to vote for both women and Black men, right? They wanted to empower the Black community that lived in the Jim Crow South. Because remember, they were being terrorized by former Confederate soldiers and former slave owners. So Black women were not thinking about themselves as individuals or even themselves as an individual group. They wanted the right to vote for everybody. And yes, they did want the right to vote for the Black community because it would give the Black community more say. And it would give the Black community power. But we know what happened, don't we? Black women were oppressed from every side. And we talked about that when we talked about intersectionality. They experienced racism because they're Black and sexism because they're women, right? So they're getting it from every side. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the thinking, and it's still that way really, because when you think of women, you think of white women. And when you think of Black, you think of Black men. Where do Black women fall? So I'm sure most of you either know or at least have heard of the much praised Seneca Falls Convention, you know, the Women's Rights Convention. Well, that was the beginning of the end when it comes to the partnership of the white suffragettes and the Black suffragettes. Because what they realized at the Seneca Falls Convention is that the white suffragettes, the elite white suffragettes. Their only concern was with upper-class married women and their issues. It completely ignored the struggles and the needs of black women and the working-class white women. Sound familiar? Yeah. And just a reminder that black women looked at activism holistically, meaning they sought equal rights for both women and black people, thereby improving the lives of everyone, not just one group. So what follows next, we've already talked about. The white suffragettes realized that they would gain more support if they kicked out the black suffragettes. They focused solely on the right to vote for white women, to the exclusion of black women. On top of that, we know that Congress was kicking around the ideas of the 14th and 15th Amendment. White suffragettes, as many times as I've said that word, you would think it would flow off my tongue. Anyway, we know that white suffragettes like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, we know that they were pissed. They were highly upset. Okay. They were, because black men had gotten the vote, would get the vote, and had gotten the vote before white women. I'm trying to remember the quote. Never before in the history of man has the black man been placed above his mistress. You remember that quote? Yeah, they were livid. But there's more. Yeah. The white suffragettes and the organizations that they were in and or started took on a whole smells like white supremacy. And that's, we know it's due to the fact that Southern white women were now joining these organizations because black women had been pushed aside. And don't forget, Southern white people were afraid of black people gaining more political advantage and therefore more power. Does that sound familiar? I figured it would. Yeah. Because of these factors, one, the focus on upper class married white women as opposed to all women. Two, the fit that Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton threw because black men were going to get the vote before they were. And three, racism. Racism by an organization and from a group of women that you had helped, that you had worked side by side with. Your struggles were their struggles, and their struggles were yours until you found out that their struggles were your struggles, and your struggles were yours. All of these things led black women to create their own organizations in an effort to obtain the right to vote. Okay. Now, there were already several organizations in existence, and a few of them merged, that's the word, merged to become one organization that worked more effectively. Okay, so we're talking about the National Federation of Afro-American Women. They joined the Colored Women's League out of Washington, D.C., and in 1896, both groups combined to form the National Association of Colored Women. We'll be talking about that next week. Okay? Now, they did all of this working and just working to gain the right to vote. They knew that it would empower Black people and the Black community. This is just a side note, okay? Now, prior to the 19th Amendment, we know that several states were already allowing women to vote. In some cases, they even allowed Black women to vote too. I know, shocking. But the 19th Amendment gave the right to vote to all women, regardless of where they lived. Okay? Now, Black women, y'all know how we do, okay? We took full advantage of our right to vote. We voted often. In any election that said y'all need to vote for something, we did it. We were registered. We made sure we were registered. And we worked hard to register other people, right? Other Black people and financially challenged white people. Okay? This was noticed by the North and the South, neither of them wanting Black people to have that kind of power, the ability to change the government, thereby changing laws, creating laws. Does any of that sound familiar? Any of it? So it was noticed, and both North and South either created laws or strengthened laws that kept or tried to hinder Black people from voting. Now, we talked about a few of those, right? The grandfather clauses, the poll tax, the literacy test. For that one, I think it was the South. They added a new rule or a new literacy test saying that not only did you have to be able to read the Constitution, you also had to interpret the Constitution. Yep, it was a whole English assignment. But if you were not able to do that, you were not allowed to vote. What I've been learning reminds me of the significance of Stacey Abrams and what she and 4 other women did, carrying on the work of Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, and yes, Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, working for the betterment of all.